Hi, Ed Bixby here from the Global Green Burial Alliance, and this is Spotlight Now. I'm here today without my co-host Gretchen Spletzer, who is on a little bit of a hiatus. We have a great episode today for you. We have a gentleman named Brandon Zimmerman, who is a volunteer coordinator of the Friends of Mount Vernon Cemetery, which was formed in earnest in 2022 as a small group of volunteers dedicated to the restoration of Philadelphia's historic Mount Vernon Cemetery. Early FMVC events served to rally a diverse community around the blighted 170-year-old cemetery. Activities included cutting vines, clearing plots, and mowing roads to reestablish accessibility to the 28-acre property and restore dignity to its over 33,000 burials. Today, the FMVC has grown to include over 100 volunteers. The group not only continues to hold monthly cleanup events, but helps families find loved ones, transcribes MVC burial records, holds public tours, and works cooperatively with numerous community groups to expand the FMVC's restorative mission. In November 2023, the FMVC were awarded a neighborhood arts grant by the City of Philadelphia's Office of Arts, Culture, and the Creative Economy to hold the cemetery's first ever fall festival. Over 300 members of the public attended, assessing the cemetery for the first time in almost 20 years. So as we go along, you can learn more about the FMVC and their events or donate to their ongoing mission on Instagram at Mount Vernon Cemetery or at Friends of Mount Vernon Cemetery at gmail.com. So it's my pleasure to introduce Brandon Zimmerman. And the reason this conversation is really important is that, as we all know, there are these wonderful opportunities, in all of our communities across the country. And people like Brandon are leading the way to bring dignity and self-respect and all the great things that these places can offer to our community. So, Brandon, welcome.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you guys having me.
Absolutely. So, I think what's most interesting here for our viewers would be to know. I certainly know about Mount Vernon and how wonderful that property is. If you could give us a little backstory on Mount Vernon Cemetery, a little history lesson on it.
Sure. So Mount Vernon Cemetery is right across the street from Laurel Hill Cemetery, and don't worry if you haven't heard of us before. So many people in the area, so many people in Philadelphia, aren't familiar with the cemetery, despite the fact that it's right across from gorgeous, beautiful, famous Laurel Hill Cemetery. Because it's been shut off, like we mentioned in the intro, but it's been shut off to the public for generations, and which is a real shame. We're trying to bring it back from the brink. So the cemetery was founded in 1856. The first burial took place in 1857, and some very significant burials happened there. We have famous actors. We have famous, local Philadelphia-based beer barons buried there. Probably our most famous burial for modern times is the Drew and the Barrymore families. So the ancestors of the famous actress Drew Barrymore are buried there. And the cemetery is roughly 28 acres. It's kind of we call it a tight 26. Again, across the street, by comparison, is about 78 acres. So they're about, 3 times our size. So relatively small as far as Victorian cemeteries go, but nevertheless. And the cemetery fell under the control of one gentleman in the 20th century who effectively kind of lost interest in the cemetery, neglected the cemetery. He shut down the ability to access the property, to purchase plots, and really continue on as a functioning cemetery company. He kind of stopped selling plots in the 1960s, and the property has basically snowballed into neglect ever since then. In the past 10-15 years, it has gone from overgrown and slightly covered in weeds to an absolute nightmare. I mean, it's a jungle in there. I mean, it truly is. In the summer times, we call it the Green Inferno. It's just porcelain-berry vines as far as the eye can see. Mugwort. It has just completely exploded in terms of the vegetation, just absolutely consuming the place. And sort of the good news, bad news of it, which is kind of what we're focusing on, is it's a 28-acre property in the middle of the city of Philadelphia that has effectively gone back to nature. So we have families of foxes in there. We have families of deer in there. We just had a bird watching group come through last month, and they spotted a great spotted owls actually. So while from the human point of view, it's a sorry sight. From sort of the nature standpoint, it's become quite an amazing sort of pseudo isolated sort of microcosm of urban wildlife, which has been really fantastic to see. But nevertheless, our goal is to try and restore the property, if not back to its original state, at least to some semblance where it is safe to access the property again. Currently, because we don't have a real handle on the topography, it's not safe for people to be in there alone, walking through the plots. We have, sinkholes, we have, groundhog holes, we have mausoleums that have toppled over, we have unstable crypts. So we can't have people in there, in mass as it is right now. But we do these isolated cleanup events, we do these isolated tours and so forth in areas that we know are safe, that we have cleared. And yeah, that's kind of our mission on a weekly, monthly basis. We go in there and we clear what we can. We learn what we can about the cemetery's fascinating history, the people who were buried there. And like you mentioned in the intro, we do fall festivals. We're just about to finish up our second annual one on December 7th. In which we're bringing folks through, and we've cleared enough now, and we know enough now where we can talk about specific aspects of the cemetery, like its architecture, like the symbolism that's found on some of the tombstones. Be able to talk about some of the lives of the people who have been buried there, but who have been kind of lost to time as a result of the neglect and the inaccessibility. So we do a little bit of a lot, and are trying to do a lot with little in terms of trying to bring this place back, back from the dead, as we say.
Absolutely. Well, what I'd like to say to the viewers is that I've had the pleasure to actually tour the cemetery with Brandon, and it's absolutely magnificent in the way that we can say that 50 years ago this place was kind of locked up and forgotten, but ultimately, nature is very very ingenious. It's recreated a space that is really like an oasis, and in the middle of a metropolitan area. And I think what's most important, about this for all the viewers to understand is that it doesn't have to be recreated back into like our neighbor next, or the neighbor of MVC next door, West Laurel, or Laurel Hill, I should say. It can still stay a version of this, arboretum forested area that could be a green space. And I'd like to ask you, Brandon, knowing a little bit about the community that surrounds that, what impact do you think Mount Vernon Cemetery could have on that surrounding community when the gates are opened again?
That's a great question, and I think in both in terms of specifics, but also in terms of just bigger picture. I think the impact would be huge. Mount Vernon Cemetery is kind of I kind of say it's in no man's land, so to speak. But Philadelphia is very dedicated to its neighborhoods. It's we get a lot of pride based off of sort of where we live within sort of the sections of Philadelphia. South Philly, North Philly. But then there's the smaller communities within that, and Mount Vernon kind of falls in this middle section that goes by kind of a bunch of different names. Some it borders East Falls, it borders Strawberry Mansion, it borders an area known as Swamp Poodle, which is a recent one that I've learned of a name of the neighborhood. So as a result of it kind of being stuck in this place between all these different neighborhoods, a lot of people are aware of it, but nobody necessarily wants to claim it in terms of restorative, functions, and donating money and so on and so forth. And again, rightfully so, it's been shut off to everybody, regardless of who had claimed it. It's been shut off from the world, for decades. So to be able to open the gates again and invite that surrounding community to enter, the impact would be huge, and not only from a cultural standpoint, so that they would able to enter and kind of do like we've been doing, which is relearn, revive, the stories and the people from of the past who are buried there, be able to learn, possibly, aspects of the heritage, because undoubtedly there are local, people, buried in that cemetery. Um, but exactly to your point of what it currently, is, when I take people through there, I say this these days, this is a cemetery in name only. It has gone back to nature. It has functioned for the last umpteen years. We're not exactly sure when it went full jungle, but it has functioned more as a nature preserve and a green space than it has as a cemetery. I get a lot of people who say, well, why don't you just douse the whole place in herbicides, or why don't you do controlled burns in there? And it's like, well, why would I destroy the ecosystem in here in its entirety? Why would we set fire to this stuff and burn out the deer and the foxes and the birds? By all accounts, what do they say? Like, possession is three-tenths of the law, or whatever that saying is.
Yeah.
They've owned it a lot longer than we have. We're not, the foxes aren't the intruders in there. We are, right? They have more of a claim to it than we do. They've been using it every day. They raise their young in there, and they survive in there. So the ability to open those doors and let people come in and see this green space, from an area that is, um, most of the inhabitants in the surrounding neighborhood, a large majority of them live below the poverty line. Majority of them are persons of color, who historically have been refused, and this country again at large, have been usually, don't have a burial space for their communities. Mount Vernon, contributes to that. There are, because of when the cemetery was shut down in the 60s, there are no known people of color buried in the neighborhood. So to be able to provide a viable green space, a community space, for those communities traditionally, historically denied access to such spaces, the impact would be huge, for them to be able to make it their own, to be able to come in and create programmatic events of their own. I can't necessarily advocate for, people growing fruit and vegetables in cemeteries, but at least out of the ground. But setting up some kind of urban farming in there, beekeeping, the ability to have that kind of opportunity and that kind of space for that neighborhood, again, would be epic. And you could argue, well, why can't they just go across the street for that? And yes, that's certainly, an argument. However, again, to your point earlier, this, what it has become is something special, and I say this all the time to people. There's something, and it's hard if you haven't been there. It's hard if you haven't stood in that space. And I know that sounds so pretentious, but it's the truth. You stand in there, and yes, it's a cemetery, but you stand in there and you go like, there's something else in here. There's something indescribable in here. Yes, we have to control this. The vines are out of control. It's too dangerous to be in here and just let people wander around. So we got to tame it a little bit, but at the same time, there's something about this wild component. There's something about this back to nature component, and how it aligns with, organizations like yourselves, the Green Burial Movement. There's something, I can't say elusive, because we kind of know what it is. It's the wild component, it's the wilderness component. But there's something about it that has to be maintained, because that's a part of its identity. Again, it's functioned as this something else for not as long as it was a cemetery, but again, at least in recent memory, it has functioned as this something else than it has just, your bog standard cemetery. At least in recent years. And and I think that's important to maintain. Not only for the ecosystem that's in there right now, but also for our future ideas of what the space could be, its relation again to something like green burial movements or what have you. The tried and true go back to turf cemetery. If you want that experience, you go across the street for that. You want that experience, you go literally right next door to Mount Peace Cemetery. Mount Vernon's flanked on two sides by another cemetery that's all grass, traditionally turf. So the exciting thing for us as the volunteers, and the exciting thing about the future here, is the possibility of charting sort of a new course, a new identity for this place, that is more in alignment with community needs for a green space, and how that jives with its current need to exist as some kind of wilderness. So I say all that to say that the impact would be great, and we're hoping to be able to provide that more and more each year.
Absolutely. And for the viewers to understand, Brandon, I love the idea that, it is difficult to put into words, but, to be surrounded by life and death, is something very special. And with Mount Vernon going back to nature, see, that's the irony of the situation. We as human beings think we can control everything, but we cannot. And if we were gone tomorrow, this world would change drastically almost overnight. So Mount Vernon was swallowed up by nature, rightfully so. And now we should coexist with nature. And I've said for a very long time to all the viewers on this, that what makes the most sense about natural burial is it takes so little to maintain that space and to be part of that natural landscape. And I've always looked at these cemeteries that are, works of art. I mean, let me tell you something. When I first came to Mount Vernon and I saw the gatehouse and the gates and all that beautiful architecture, and then it mixed in with nature, it's very much into, undescribable. Like you said, it's like you have to physically be there to see this unbelievable beauty. It's almost like going to, let's say, Rome or Pompeii, and looking at the ancient ruins that we marvel at, because that's what they'll all become over time, ironically. Because a traditional cemetery, unfortunately, in the sense of being a lawn cemetery, cannot last forever. But a Mount Vernon can, and a natural burial option within these spaces preserves that rich history. And let me tell you, there's no city like Philadelphia. For our viewers, if you haven't been there, if you love our country and you love history, there's no place quite like it. And it's really special. So, I mean, I commend the work that you guys have done. And, I'm looking forward to a new future for Mount Vernon with your organization, you know, uh, offering all kinds of wonderful things. And I guess, Brandon, if I were to ask you, it might be a hard question, but you've been working there for a long time. If you had a vision, if you could look into the future and say, let's say 5 years from now, what would your hopes be for Mount Vernon? What would you like to see for the city of Philadelphia and the surrounding community, and for the Friends of Mount Vernon?
Again, another great question. I'd I'd love to see, the gates open again, and even if it's not on a daily basis, every weekend or something. I'd love to see people in there doing what we have photographic proof of what they used to do in the 19th century, which was, coming and picnicking in the space, and coming and sitting in chairs and enjoying both nature as well as remembering their loved ones. Um, Mount Vernon has sort of an unusual topography in that most cemeteries are built on flat spaces, or kind of tiered systems, or what have you. Mount Vernon has an interesting topography in that it's rolling hills kind of once you get into the center of the property, and you have these incredible vistas, even with the overgrowth being what it is. So the option of having people to come in and enjoy those views like they once did, um having the gatehouse restored. It's a historic gatehouse designed by a historic Philadelphia architect. You know, on a more practical note, because it's something my volunteers ask me about all the time. And for our fall festival last year, I had to have them. We would love running water, electricity, bathrooms. Oh my God, bathrooms. Had I known how expensive bathrooms are, I would have went into a completely different line of work. My gosh. Um, so you know, having the ability to help people find their families, we can't tell you how many people contact us you know, weekly, monthly, um asking for help to find their families, both in kind of a genealogical, you know, I'm looking for my great 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 grandfather, but also people who are in their, you know, 80s, who are homebound and say, you know, one of my last wishes is to see my father's tombstone again before I die. Those are the ones that get right to your heartstrings, you know, the fact that we can't provide that access right now. So, you know, being in a place where we could check all those boxes and bring that closure to all those people would be amazing. But then in terms of the landscape, we would love to see it become kind of the direction that it was kind of headed in before the invasive vegetation kind of consumed the whole place. And kind of my long-winded response is what's really incredible is when you go in there and the volunteers are in there. We start up around this time of year and we go until about April, and you'll clear a section, and you know your main issue is the porcelain berry vines, this very woody mugwort which has just gone completely out of control. And when we get rid of those two things and then spring comes, you know, and between the birds and between the winds and so forth, you can go through the cemetery even in the dead of summer when the whole place is jungle, and you can tell where we've cleared because a completely different set of vegetation has started to grow up in those spaces, because you know the sun can get to the dirt again, because the birds can land on the ground again. And so we've got goldenrod, and we've got staghorn sumac, and we've got, you know, all kinds of other types of species. And yes, I know a lot of those are also, you know, invasive or weeds or whatever, but uh in those areas that we clear, when you see this entire different ecosystem pop up, again, where are most of the birds in that section? Where do you see most of the wildlife in that section? It's like they know that's the rejuvenated space for no other reason other than they can walk around in it. They can find the ground again. So that times, you know, the 26, 28 acres, you know, it looked more like a park than a jungle. Would be fantastic. We early on we said, you know, we'd love to keep it, you know, to a degree, a sustained ruin of sorts, not in the fall down decrepit sense, but in the, you know, in the wild sense of it, in a natural, you know, state, kind of is more that intention, you know, similar to, you know, you mentioned Rome, you know, the cemeteries in London, for example, where they let the grass grow high, they plant native flowers, you know, in the fields, and you mow specific paths, rather than, again, everything must be manicured. The minute a leaf falls, you know, a whole crew comes out with a leaf blower and a mower, and you know, and every single leaf must be picked up. I'd love to see it, you know, still wild but just maintained. That would be amazing.
Well, that's a lovely vision, Brandon, and I'm sure it's one that can come true. I mean, this is a worthwhile endeavor, and your hard work certainly has shown. I know you got, before we go, I know you got an event coming up, and you might want to talk a little bit about that, maybe getting the community involved, correct?
Yes, absolutely. So the last two events coming up, actually, the last event of our second annual fall festival is on the Saturday, December 7th, from 10 to noon. And that is a really great cemetery architecture and symbolism tour, that's being led by one of our amazing volunteers, who's done it for about 12 years, at various other cemeteries. Really kind of an expert on the subject. We're going to just take a nice leisurely walk around the property and, you know, point out the fantastic statuary and so forth. Again, Mount Vernon, the architecture in there is incredible. We do have what in the 19th century was considered the greatest cemetery monument in the country, called the Gardel Monument, Gardel. If you look it up, it's a massive pyramid that has statuary on it. 19th century, kind of the considered one of the wonders of the world. People would come just to marvel at it. So we'll be taking people through on December 7th. And then more importantly than that will be the following Saturday. That's December 14th. And we're going to go from 10 until maybe noon, 1 o'clock. And that's a community cleanup event. And, kind of pairing this event with, the question that you just asked in terms of what I'd love to see happen. This community event is important for two reasons. And the first one is something I mentioned previously, which is the communities around the property, as a result of not being allowed in, have kind of either forsaken or forgot about us. So one of the things we're trying to do is get the community engaged and involved again, to say, hey, we're here, we're doing stuff, lack of better term, under new management, put that sign up. So to try and get the surrounding community engaged again. The other task is to try and clean up the exterior of the property. And, for those of you that, drive past, blighted properties and so forth, neglect begets neglect, right? Blight, turns into even more blight. So we have a lot of people who think because the property is abandoned, they can, they can litter, they can dump stuff, they can, so the street outside the cemetery is a mess. The community has spoken. Several people have come to us and said, we'd really love for you all to clean up outside. We know the inside is important, but the outside is important to us, because we have to walk these streets. We have to live here. We have to take our children and our grandchildren, down the hill to the daycare center. So when we heard what the community wanted, we had to respond. It's a civic duty, to do that. And, we're not just making this space better for one particular group of people. We're in it for everyone. That's what we're hoping to have happen, is that everyone, regardless of age or race or money or background or whatever, to re-engage with Mount Vernon and make it a better place for everyone. So again, on December 14th, we're going to try and clean up the outside of the property. We're reaching out to various community leaders in that area to try and get a large group of people to come clean up the property outside, and then hopefully we'll be able to bring everybody inside and show them the beauty of the place. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, Brandon, I commend all your efforts, and
Thank you.
kudos to all of the volunteers, because it takes a whole village, and it looks to me like you have collected a village to help you and support you in this. And the Global Green Burial Alliance certainly supports you. I hope all of our viewers are inspired by this story, because there are Mount Vernons everywhere within this country, and they just lie in waiting, to be reclaimed and rejoiced and repurposed. And it's really important work. So thanks again, and please do consider to support Mount Vernon's, the Friends of. I mean, we're going to put up some different links